She was already clearing out her desk when I walked in. I had been in the building for exactly 11 minutes. I had said good morning to the receptionist, gotten my coffee from the break room, exchanged the brief warm greetings of someone returning after a 2-week transition period, and walked toward the department I now led, the department I had spent 4 years building, that I had managed informally for the better part of 2 of those years while my former boss took credit for its outputs in quarterly presentations I was not invited to attend. My name was on the door now. Not his. Mine. And the woman who had been given my promotion 8 months ago, the woman my former boss had installed in the role I had earned, the woman he had been seeing privately for 6 months before he announced her appointment to a room full of people who had all known about their relationship and said nothing, was standing beside her desk with a cardboard box and the expression of someone who has just done a calculation and arrived at an answer that requires immediate action. She looked up when I came through the door. I looked at her. The box was half full. She had been there before me. She had come in early, before 7, the security log would later confirm, specifically to collect her things before I arrived. She had known I was coming. She had known what my arrival meant. And she had decided, in whatever conversation she had with herself in the days before this morning, that staying was not a position she was willing to hold. She said, "I'm resigning. Effective today. I'll have HR process the paperwork." I said, "Okay." She picked up the box. She walked out. I stood in the doorway of my office, the one with my name on the door, and I watched her go. And then I set down my coffee, sat in my chair, opened my laptop, and started my first day as Director of Operations at Callaway Strand Consulting. I want to tell you how we got here. Because the path between the day my promotion was handed to someone else and the morning she walked out carrying a cardboard box is the part of this story that matters most. And it started not with rage, not with a dramatic confrontation, not with anything that looked like power. It started with a decision I made alone, in my car, in a parking garage, on the worst professional day of my life. My name is Theodora Baines-Ose. Everyone calls me Theo. I am 37 years old and I have spent the past 6 years as a senior operations manager at Callaway Strand Consulting, a mid-size management consulting firm in Nashville, Tennessee, with a client portfolio that spans healthcare, logistics, and financial services. I am good at operations in the specific way that people are good at things they were built for, not because I was trained to be good at it, though I was trained thoroughly, but because the work aligns with how my mind naturally moves. Systems, dependencies, the gap between what a process claims to do and what it actually produces. I see these things the way some people hear music, immediately, specifically, without having to work for the perception. I had been at Callaway Strand for 6 years when the promotion cycle opened. 4 years as senior operations manager, 2 before that in a coordinator role that I had outgrown within 8 months and that my then manager had, to her credit, escalated me out of quickly once she understood what she was working with. The director of operations role had been open since the previous director, a man named Carl Webb, had retired 18 months earlier. The position had been filled in an interim capacity by me, informally, without the title or the compensation, in the specific way that companies fill leadership gaps with the most capable person available while maintaining the option to make a different decision when the formal appointment comes. I had been running the operations department in every practical sense for 14 months before the appointment was announced. My boss at that time was a man named Gregory Strand. Not the founding Strand, his uncle, retired now, but Gregory, 44 years old, managing director of the Nashville office, a man with good instincts about clients and poor instincts about people, which is a combination that produces a specific kind of organizational damage that tends to be invisible until it is significant. Gregory was charming in the professional sense. Good in rooms with clients. Able to make people feel heard in the particular way of someone who has learned the technique of listening without actually absorbing. He was the kind of manager whose team performed well despite him rather than because of him, and who collected the credit for that performance with the ease of someone who had never been asked to distinguish between the two. I had worked for Gregory for 4 years. I understood him with the complete clarity of someone who has spent 4 years in close professional proximity to a person and has paid careful attention. What I did not understand, what I had not allowed myself to fully see, was the specific nature of his relationship with a woman named Camille Forsyth, who had joined Callaway Strand 14 months earlier as a senior strategy analyst in the division adjacent to mine. Camille was 31, sharp in the technical sense, professionally presentable, and had arrived at the firm with the specific confidence of someone who understood that capability and positioning were related but not identical. She was good at her job. I want to say that clearly because the story I am about to tell is not about Camille's incompetence. She was capable. She was simply not the right person for a role that required 14 months of operational context that she did not have and that I had built. I noticed the relationship between Gregory and Camille in month 3 of her tenure. Not because anyone told me, because I pay attention to the dynamics in rooms. The specific quality of Gregory's attention when Camille spoke in meetings. The way his scheduling had shifted in certain patterns. The fact that she had been included in 2 client presentations that were outside her scope and that I had not been invited to despite managing the relevant operational components. I noted these things. I said nothing. There was nothing professionally actionable to say, and I had learned in 6 years of organizational life that commenting on dynamics before they produce outcomes creates problems and solves nothing. The outcome came on a Thursday afternoon in March. Gregory called a department heads meeting at 4 o'clock, which was unusual in its timing and in the fact that he had not sent an agenda, which Gregory always sent agendas. I arrived with the other 4 department heads, Marcellus from finance, Dana from strategy, Owen from client services, and Priya from talent, and we sat around the conference room table and Gregory stood at the head of it with the expression of a man who has rehearsed what he is about to say and is performing the rehearsal rather than the moment. He announced that after careful consideration, the Director of Operations role would be filled by Camille Forsyth, effective the 1st of the following month. He said several other things. About Camille's strong strategic vision, her cross-functional perspective, her fresh approach to operational challenges. He used the phrase new energy, which is the phrase organizations use when they have decided to prioritize appearance over experience and need language that makes that decision sound considered. I sat across the table from Gregory Strand and I did not move. I kept my face in the specific neutral that I have practiced over 6 years of professional life because the ability to receive information you did not expect without displaying its impact is one of the most important skills available in a professional environment, and I had developed it deliberately. I did not look at Marcellus, who I knew was looking at me. I did not look at Dana or Owen or Priya. I looked at Gregory, who was looking everywhere in the room except directly at me, which told me everything I needed to know about his own assessment of what he was doing. When the meeting ended, I went back to my desk. I finished the work I had open. I answered 3 emails. I completed a client deliverable that was due by end of day. Then I picked up my bag and my coat and I went to the parking garage. I sat in my car for 41 minutes. I did not cry. I want to be accurate about this because the story of a woman not crying in a parking garage after the worst professional moment of her life is important. Not because crying would have been wrong, but because what I was doing instead of crying was something more useful. I was thinking. Specifically, I was thinking about the next 18 months, about what I wanted, about what was owed to me and what I would have to build in order to collect it. Gregory Strand had given my promotion to his girlfriend. This was the operational reality of what had just happened, stripped of the language about fresh perspectives and new energy. He had done it in front of 4 colleagues who all knew about the relationship and who had all chosen to say nothing because Gregory was the managing director and saying nothing was the professionally safe choice. I had 2 options. The first option was the direct one: file a formal complaint with HR and corporate, document the relationship, challenge the appointment on the basis of the preferential treatment it represented, and pursue the outcome through the institutional process. The second option was the longer one: stay. Build. Outperform. Create conditions in which the decision Gregory had made became visibly and unambiguously wrong, in the specific way that wrong decisions in organizations eventually become impossible to sustain when the person who is passed over does not leave and does not diminish but instead becomes more essential and more recognized with every quarter. I sat in that parking garage and I chose the second option. Not because I was afraid of the first. Not because the complaint would have been without merit, it had significant merit, and I knew it. But because I understood, from 6 years of watching how organizations actually work, that the first option would produce a fight that I might win legally and would certainly lose culturally. Gregory would characterize it. The process would become the story. Camille would become a sympathy figure regardless of her role. And even in the best outcome, I would be the woman who filed the complaint rather than the woman who was so good that the decision to overlook her became impossible to defend. I chose to become impossible to ignore. I called a woman named Sylvia Chen that evening. Sylvia was 55 years old, a leadership coach who had spent 15 years working with mid-level professionals navigating organizations that were not serving them well. She was not a therapist, not a career counselor in the traditional sense, but a strategist, someone who understood organizational dynamics with the precision of a chess player and who had, in the previous 4 years, worked with 3 people I respected enough to take seriously as a reference. I told her what had happened. Everything, precisely. She listened without interrupting. Then she said, "What do you want in 18 months?" I said, "The director role." "My director role." She said, "Then let's build the case that makes refusing you the second time impossible." We met every 2 weeks for the following 8 months. The sessions were not emotional processing, they were strategic. Sylvia helped me identify the specific gaps in Camille's performance that were going to become visible as she settled into a role that required context she did not have. She helped me decide which of those gaps to fill quietly and which to let become part of the organizational record. She helped me build relationships with the 2 corporate partners above Gregory who had the authority to override a managing director's staffing decisions if the business case was sufficiently compelling. She helped me understand something I had known instinctively but had not yet articulated clearly, that the most powerful position in an organization is not the person with the title. It is the person without the title whose removal would cause the most damage. I had been that person for 14 months before Gregory's decision. I needed to become it so visibly and so undeniably that even Gregory could not pretend otherwise. I began the week after Camille's appointment. The first thing I did was stop doing work that was not mine. This sounds counterintuitive. It was, in fact, the most strategic decision I made in the 8 months that followed. For 14 months of informal directorship, I had been absorbing the work that fell between functions, the coordination tasks, the cross-departmental communications, the client escalations that the operations director would normally handle and that, in the absence of a director, had fallen to me because I was the most capable person in proximity to them. I stopped absorbing them. Not dramatically. Not in a way that was visible as a withdrawal. I simply began routing them to Camille, her new title, her new responsibility. Every client escalation that came to my desk that belonged at director level. Every cross-departmental coordination request. Every corporate partner inquiry that required directorial response. I routed them all to Camille. Politely. Specifically. With brief notes explaining why they were in her scope. Within 3 weeks, Camille was drowning. Not because she was incompetent. Because the role required 14 months of operational context that she did not have, and the work I had been quietly absorbing for 14 months had masked the gap between what the role demanded and what she had been prepared to deliver. Gregory covered for her in the first month. I watched him attend meetings on her behalf, answer questions that should have gone to her, smooth over client concerns that should have been her responsibility to address. He was covering for her the way you cover for someone you are protecting personally rather than managing professionally, which produced its own problems. The specific visibility problem of a managing director who is spending his time on operational details that should be handled by his operations director. The second thing I did was build upward. I had identified the 2 corporate partners, a woman named Eleanor Voss, who oversaw the Eastern region from corporate headquarters in Atlanta, and a man named James Calloway, the founding family's representative on the managing board, as the relevant decision-makers above Gregory. I had professional relationships with both, developed over 6 years of operational work that had touched their portfolios. I deepened those relationships deliberately. Not in a political way. In a results way. I identified 2 projects within the next quarter that had corporate visibility and that I could lead with outcomes that would be directly attributable to my specific work. I pitched both to Eleanor and James directly, within my professional authority to do, since both projects were in my operational scope. I delivered both ahead of schedule with client satisfaction scores that I documented carefully. Eleanor mentioned my name to Gregory in a quarterly call, in the specific way that corporate partners mention people when they want a managing director to understand that someone is being noticed. I was not present for that call. Gregory told me about it afterward, in a tone that was careful in the way of someone navigating a situation he had not anticipated. I thanked him professionally. The third thing I did was document everything. Not for litigation, I had not ruled that out, but it was not my primary strategy. I documented for the organizational record. The projects I led. The outcomes I produced. The client relationships I managed. The department metrics during the period of Camille's directorship versus the 14 months I had managed the department informally. The numbers were not ambiguous. They told a clear story about what had been happening before and what was happening now, and that story was available to anyone who looked at the data with clear eyes. Sylvia told me once, in month 4, the truth is patient, but it needs a well-organized filing system. You're providing both. She was not wrong. The situation with Camille accelerated in month 6. A major client, Hartfield Medical Systems, one of our 3 largest accounts, escalated a service concern to corporate. The concern was operational, a series of implementation delays and communication failures that had accumulated over 4 months and that the client's leadership was characterizing as a systemic problem rather than isolated incidents. Eleanor Voss called Gregory directly. The call, from what Gregory later described to me in a conversation I had not expected to be included in, was not comfortable. Eleanor asked Gregory what had changed in the operations function in the past 6 months. Gregory said the department was in transition with new leadership. Eleanor asked when the transition would stabilize. Gregory said he expected it would stabilize soon. Eleanor said she needed it stabilized before Hartfield's next quarterly review, which was 8 weeks away. Gregory came to me the next day. He asked me to take the Hartfield situation. Not formally, without changing any titles or reporting structures, just asking me to step in and manage the client recovery. I looked at him across his desk. I said, I'm happy to support the Hartfield recovery. I'll need to be the primary point of contact for their leadership team, which means Camille will need to defer to me on all Hartfield communications while the recovery is in progress. He said that was fine. I said, I'll also need the project authority to restructure the implementation timeline and reassign team resources as I see fit. He said that was fine. I said, and I'd like this arrangement documented, a formal note that I'm leading the Hartfield recovery with full project authority, for the record. He looked at me for a moment. He said, Theo, I don't think that's necessary. I said, I think it is. For clarity of accountability. If I'm responsible for the outcome, I need the documentation of the authority. That's standard project governance. He agreed. Sylvia had told me in month 2, never take responsibility without documentation of authority. It is the most important sentence in organizational life. I had written it on a note card and kept it in my desk drawer. I led the Hartfield recovery. 8 weeks. Daily client contact, complete restructuring of the implementation approach, 3 new team configurations, 2 escalated conversations with their C-suite that I navigated with the specific combination of operational clarity and relationship management that I had been developing for 6 years. The quarterly review went well. Eleanor sent Gregory an email afterward that he forwarded to me with the single word impressive, which from Gregory was the equivalent of a standing ovation. The email from Eleanor said the Hartfield recovery was exceptionally managed. Whoever led that work should be recognized. Gregory forwarded it. He knew who had led that work. So did Eleanor. The conversation happened 6 weeks after the Hartfield review. Eleanor called me directly, not through Gregory, directly, to my desk extension, which told me the conversation had been discussed at a level above Gregory before it arrived at me. She told me that the corporate partners were reviewing the Nashville office's operational leadership structure. She told me they had reviewed the performance data from the past 8 months. She told me they wanted to discuss my professional trajectory. We spoke for 40 minutes. At the end of the conversation, she told me that the director of operations role was going to be reevaluated. She told me that this process would involve a formal review that Gregory would participate in, but that the corporate partners had sufficient authority to act on their own assessment if the review produced a clear conclusion. I thanked her. I called Sylvia that evening. Sylvia said, "How do you feel?" I said, "Like 8 months of patience just became something." She said, "It was always something. It just needed the right conditions to be visible." The formal review took 3 weeks. I was interviewed twice by Eleanor and once by James Calloway. I provided the documentation I had been building for 8 months, the project records, the performance metrics, the Hartfield recovery file, the client satisfaction data. I provided it not as a complaint and not as an indictment of anyone, but as a professional portfolio. The work I had done and what it had produced. Gregory was interviewed as well. I do not know what he said in those interviews. I know what the data said, because data says what it says regardless of narrative. Camille was not interviewed, which told me the conclusion had already been reached before the formal process completed. The outcome was announced on a Wednesday. The director of operations role would transition to me. Camille would be offered a lateral move to a senior analyst position in the strategy division, a role that was appropriate to her actual context and capability and that she was, in my professional assessment, genuinely suited for. I was given 2 weeks before my formal start date. Camille was given the same 2 weeks to decide about the lateral offer. She decided over the weekend. She sent an email to HR on the Monday of my first week as director that said she was resigning, effective immediately, and that she would collect her personal items before I arrived on my official start date. She did not know that I was coming in early. Or perhaps she did. Perhaps the early arrival was deliberate on both of our parts, her to be gone before I arrived, me to arrive before she expected, the two of us having a final wordless conversation through our timing about what we each understood had happened and what it meant. I walked in at 7:40. She was at her desk with a cardboard box at 7:40. I said okay when she said she was resigning. She picked up the box and walked out, and I sat down at my desk and opened my laptop and started the work that had always been mine. Gregory Strand left Callaway Strand 4 months after my appointment, ostensibly to pursue other opportunities, which is the phrase organizations use when a managing director's departure is not entirely voluntary. Eleanor Voss handled the transition with the efficiency of someone who had been anticipating it and had already identified his replacement. The new managing director was a woman named Patricia Osei, no relation to me, same name, which the office found quietly amusing, who had been running a smaller regional office for 3 years and who operated with the specific collaborative authority of someone who understood that an operation runs on its people and treats them accordingly. I have worked under Patricia for 9 months now, and the department I lead is performing at the highest level it has achieved in the 6 years I have been in this building. The client satisfaction scores, the implementation timelines, the team retention rate, all of them are numbers I am proud of in the specific way you are proud of things that represent what you actually know how to do. Camille took a position at a smaller firm in Nashville. I heard this through professional channels and wished her well in the private way you wish people well when the story has moved past them. She was capable. She had been placed in a situation that was not right for her by someone who was serving his own interests rather than hers, and whatever she navigated as a result of that was not entirely her story to own. Gregory is, from what I understand, consulting independently. I do not think about him often. When I do, it is with the specific absence of feeling that comes when someone has lost the power to matter to your professional life and you have discovered that you do not miss their relevance. I want to tell you about the 8 months. Not the outcome, the 8 months themselves, because I think they are the most instructive part of this story and I do not want them to be compressed into a summary when they deserve to be described. The 8 months were not easy. I want to be honest about that because stories about strategic patience sometimes present the waiting as merely cerebral, as though you can decide to be patient and the decision resolves the difficulty. The 8 months were professionally precise and personally hard. There were evenings when the gap between what I knew I was worth and what my title said I was worth felt like a weight I was not sure I could keep carrying. There were moments in meetings where Camille occupied a chair that should have been mine and I had to manage the specific interior work of being fully present and professionally functional while also being genuinely, legitimately angry. I did that work every day. Sylvia's questions helped. Marcellus, who had been at the table the day Gregory announced the appointment and who had looked at me with the specific expression of someone who knows what they are witnessing and is ashamed of not having said something, became a quiet ally, not dramatically, not in ways that required risk of him, but in the small consistent ways of a colleague who is doing what he can within the limits of what his own position allows. And my mother. My mother called me every Sunday, the way she has called me every Sunday my entire life, and in those calls she asked about the work and listened to the actual answer and said, more than once, during those 8 months of Theo, the people who do it right always end up where they were supposed to be. They just have to wait longer than the people who cut corners. She has been saying things like this to me since I was 8 years old, and she was right then and she was right now, and I have never once found a situation in which her basic framework about the world has failed to apply. I do it right. I wait as long as it takes. I document everything. And eventually, the chair becomes mine. The work is the answer. It always has been, and it always will be. If you are carrying something at work right now, something unfair, something that has been given to someone who did not earn it, something that makes you question whether doing it right even matters, I want you to hear this directly from someone who sat in a parking garage for 41 minutes and chose the longer road. It matters. Every documented outcome. Every quietly delivered result. Every professional relationship built on genuine work rather than political positioning. It matters and it accumulates, and one day it becomes undeniable. Stay. Build. Document. And subscribe, because next week I have a story about a woman who documented for 2 years and walked away with everything.